Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this very special stream tonight. I'm joined by Andrew Thompson, and he's going to be going through some of the details about making stations, aren't you, Andy?
I am.
Before we start, can we just get a quick sound check from everybody in the chat? Can you hear me all okay? Andy, if you want to say hello, make sure they can hear you as well.
Hello, good evening, everyone.
Okay, looks like we're good. Excellent. All right, so Andy, if you'd like to introduce yourselves to everyone and tell them what do you do here at Dovetail and what are you going to be discussing with everyone tonight?
So my name is Andrew Thompson. I am an artist level 1 on the train simulator team. I started Dovetail back very, very early 2019 as a QA member and slowly worked my way through over about 8 months to then progress into development, where I moved on to be a junior artist for Train Simulator and recently got promoted after about a year or so. I worked on sort of roughly 5 DLCs since starting. And tonight I'm going to be sort of giving you a brief run through of the workflow I go through when making train stations for Train Simulator.
Yeah. All right, excellent. So it's been quite an interesting journey for you to get to where you are now. Yeah. Excellent, and everybody's saying congratulations on your promotion as well.
Oh, thanks all. Too kind.
So should we crack on with the presentation, and then you can talk your way through it. I'm going to be in charge of the slides, everybody. So Andy is going to let me know when he wants to go on to the next slide. And somebody made a joke saying, "Was your journey via train?" So we'll go on to the first slide.
So,
what are we looking at?
These are sort of brief reference sheets of how I start a project. So starting a project, we do an overview of the entire project. We'll run up and down the route on sort of Google Maps, Google Earth. Mm-hmm. If due to COVID, we would normally send someone out to go up and down the route, taking reference shots and/or reference videos. However, due to the restrictions, we can't do that, so we've been doing a lot of it online. So I start the project off by gathering up as much reference as I can find. Flickr, Google Images, any reference I can find. Mm-hmm. And this will help me sort out what I'm going to make and how I'm going to make it. And it will also help me send some references and images to outsourcers if we need some outsourcing help. So once I've gathered all the images, what you can see on the right-hand side, Reiser Bahnhof, that is a PureRef document, which is a program where you can basically just compile a bunch of images and make a big, nice reference board. As you can see at the very bottom, that is kind of the size that the reference board ends up becoming. So that's all the stations along the recently released Dresden route that was released at the start of the year.
So has it been quite challenging? Have you found it quite challenging getting all the references and stuff under the current climate? Or have you still been able to get everything you needed quite well? Has it just made it easier in a different way?
Some routes are easier than others. So, for example, UK routes, we recently had the recently released cross-city route. Duncan Seeley very, very kindly went around all the stations as it was his local route and took walk-around videos for us, which was incredible to be able to have that reference to hand. However, other countries such as Germany, I don't know if they have some privacy laws or something.
I see.
There is no sort of Google Street View, and the references are very, very limited unless you're around quite a large station such as Reiser Bahnhof. So it has made it a little bit more tricky due to the restrictions over the past year or so.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But yeah, I think that's my referencing.
Yep.
We can shift on to the next slide if you like.
Yeah, I will. And just be aware that anybody in the chat, if you do have questions for Andy, he will do his absolute best to answer them if he can. So, on to the next one.
Chat.
So what are we looking at? What is that?
This looks like just some random rubbish.
Yeah, it looks like a picture with too much blur on.
yeah, it really does. So once I've gathered all my reference, after all the track has been laid in game, or the route builders will then place platform lofts along whereabouts the stations are, and then I will grab that area with the platform loft with all the track as well, and I will export that all as a piece of geometry. Which I can then take straight into my modeling software, which I use, which is 3ds Max. So what you're looking at here is the export straight from Train Simulator that we have whilst we're building the route into 3ds Max. And this will basically allow me to have the area in which the NPCs move as in my modeling software that I can then kind of model around and make it look like an actual station. But it also gives me accurate platform heights and gives me accurate gradients. That means that when we put the station back in, it shouldn't, if it's been done correctly, it shouldn't clip any trains, and it should go in nice and properly. Not always the case, I know.
So you have situations where sometimes it just doesn't always work as you'd like.
Yeah, if, say for example, when I'm modeling the platforms, I might, or a vert or a piece of geometry might be grabbed and might be pulled a little bit when it wasn't meant to be, and that's where we really, really value the forum to give us all that tasty feedback, which we go in and fix.
So there's an interesting question here from Simon Baxter. He's saying, how do you export geometry? Is it a public available tool?
Gosh, let me think. Is it a public available tool? I am not entirely sure if it's a public available tool, because I use a development version of Train Simulator.
Yeah.
Essentially, what you have to make sure is that if you're in the build area on Train Sim, make sure that in your program files, make sure that your entire Railworks folder is ticked as not being read-only. So make sure that read-only tick is off. Then when you go into a route, everyone should be able to do this, to be fair, now that I'm thinking about it. When you go into the build option, jump into a route, you should then be able to select track, platform lofts, and then you want to do, I believe it's Control C, and then you want to go Control Shift E. Right. That will then give you a straight export of what you have selected. A lot of the time it won't take out anything like buildings that have been placed. It'll be sort of lofts, so road lofts, platform lofts, track if you've selected it, and then that should push that into a file or a folder, I believe in the Railworks folder as well. I can't remember exactly where, because I've set mine up slightly differently now. And then you should just be able to drag that straight into a piece of modeling software, because it should export as an OBJ, I believe, which should be compatible with most modeling softwares. So if you use Blender, 3ds Max, or Maya, should be fairly used by all of them.
Now, for me, a lot of that I didn't understand, because I don't know an awful lot about it. But I'm hoping that that our chat understood that, the people that use the software and stuff like that.
Yeah, hopefully that helps.
Should we head over to the next slide?
Yeah, we can get cracking.
All right, so that's more grey boxing.
Yeah, so this is another brightly coloured, just blank grey box that you're seeing. So this is the track export. The previous one was just a random export. This is the track export that I got for Reiser Bahnhof. So as you can see, it's a rather large station. I've not quite lined it up perfectly. And so what I will then do is, you can see there's a sort of yellow line on the image that sits below. That is an image that I've just put on a plane. And I have the distance measurement up in the sort of top right hand corner,
Yeah.
and that will give me the sizing that I will need to make everything look sort of a realistic size and look correct inside the game. So I will then make a box that's about that size, and then I will scale the image to that box. So the image is all correct, and all the tracks should then line up when I rotate things to be the correct size. One thing I will say, if you are doing this yourself, do not rotate the tracks, or do not rotate the stuff you have exported from in-game. Rotate the reference plane underneath it, because it is a pain to put a station back in that you then have to rotate. So if you rotate your referencing and then build around the tracks in the position they are, it should just plop straight into the game, no bother.
Have you made the mistake of rotating it when you shouldn't in the past?
So many times. Luckily no more.
Yeah, that sounded like you were talking from experience there.
So much experience. The first couple of routes I worked on, I made that mistake way too many times as a little babby junior artist. But I've advanced now. I've leveled up, so that's no longer the case.
Excellent.
We can move on and we can get started on some actual modelling.
Oh wow!
You've seen these bits. So what we're looking at here is, again, it's called grey boxing, but this is actually getting into modelling now.
Yeah.
So first, I will grey box the entire station. By that I mean I will make shapes that are roughly the right size, roughly the right sort of dimensions and stuff, to be in the location of buildings, canopies, platforms, etc., etc. The clutter I tend to leave out. I don't bother with until I'm much further on in the project. This is primarily to get the location of buildings, so we can then put in the grey box placeholder into game for the route builders to then work around that.
Yeah.
And then sort of along the way, we can update the art in the station as and when we go. But yeah, what you're looking at here is Reiser Bahnhof. This is a sort of, you can see the difference between the buildings. So the one on the left is kind of hidden behind the canopies. That is mainly what the grey boxes would look like. That is the main station building. The one on the right here that's got a fair bit more detail in it, that is the signal box, or the signal building. And that had more detail because I had built that bespoke just to get the basic workflow for this DLC down. So that was originally textured, but I have made it grey for this image. But yeah, that's kind of what the stations look like in their very, very early stages.
And where is this particular station? What are we looking at? Where is this?
This is in Reiser Bahnhof. I'm not entirely sure whereabouts this is in Germany. It must be around about the Dresden area.
The chat will probably know where it is.
Chat should know.
You're all you guys all know, right? And then Rikuzu? I'm sorry, I can't pronounce your name there. But they're asking, how long does it take to get to this stage? So by this point, how long have you been working on it?
So by this point, including sort of all the planning. So the planning I don't just do for one station, I do kind of for all the stations. So at this point, it really depends how much time we have been allocated. So I work within the commercial constraints that we have. Some routes we will have sort of 6 months development time. Some routes will only have a month or two. So I kind of have to work based around the time that we are given. I'd say planning is probably, if I was to give a percentage, probably about 15% of what we do. 15 to 20% is spent planning the route and planning things, and then the next 10% is probably grey boxing and placeholdering. So something like this, I could probably knock up in a day very, very comfortably. If it was the first one, it'd probably be about a day and a half. But as we go on, and I have, excuse me, little bits and bobs like canopies, things speed up because I can just drag and drop. I already have that piece, and use it kind of like a Lego set for the other placeholders.
Mm-hmm.
I hope that answers your question.
It sort of does. I guess the answer is very much the time can vary.
Yeah, the time really can vary.
Yeah. Sweet. Should we head on to the next slide?
Yes, let's move on because we're about to get onto platforms.
Ooh.
Lovely, lovely platforms. So the way that platforms used to be built, or other people build the platforms, is that they will take the straight game export and then texture that because they already have. When I say UV maps, that's how textures get allocated to a piece of geometry. So they will have their UV maps all set up with the right. I'm trying to think how to put this sort of more in layman's terms.
Yes, please try. Imagine that the chat, like myself, have no understanding. So.
Right. Yeah. So when you take the export from the track, that will have. If you were to throw a texture on there, it would look all correctly. It shouldn't be stretched or anything, and it should be sort of roughly the right size. However, it then makes it rather tricky if you then want to move that geometry about or do anything with it, such as extending the rear back a little bit, or adjusting the front. So where we have the front lip of the platform, if you wanted to extrude that out, bring that out, or at the bottom left one, it's the wrong way around, but that has a sort of lip that comes out, it then indents again, and then comes out at the bottom. Using the in-game export ones, that's rather tricky because the geometry is all triangulated. By that I mean, as you can see in mine, they're all a bunch of rectangles, whereas they would all be cut in half. And have a big line down the middle of them.
So there's an interesting question asking about how you would then texture curved platforms.
Right. So I will get onto that very shortly.
Yes.
Let me have a look. No, okay, I haven't put it in. But so what I would do, I would make these platform chunks, and these platform chunks are roughly about 1 meter sort of long, maybe 1.5 meters. I will then texture those chunks and make sure all the texture looks correctly. It's not stretched or whatnot. And I will use the previous grey box that you saw with all those green tracks, and I will go to the platform loft and I will run a spline along the very edge of the platform loft. Now, a spline is basically just a line that will attach itself to little verts, which is what you call a point in a piece of geometry. So the very corner of something that sort of all comes together at a point. And those points are called verts, and so I select those verts all along the in-game export, and then I could just duplicate all these little chunks that I've made all the way along. So if the platform from the in-game is curved, the spline will then be curved, and all these little chunks will just duplicate themselves around that curve.
Okay, I see what you do.
And as long as I've made the chunks kind of small enough, that will then make sure that we get a nice sort of smooth curve. If they are a little bit too large, then it will look sort of very polygonal, kind of 8-bit bitty. Yeah, and that's kind of how I build the platforms. I then, after that, they've sort of laid themselves, I will go in and make sure all the verts and the edges are joined together and look correct, and nothing's kind of sort of gone somewhere it shouldn't, which it tends to, but that's just sort of little tweaks you need to go in and do. That's basically the sort of basic run through for platforms, I believe.
On to the next slide.
I think the next one might actually be the texture for the platforms.
Ooh, it is.
So these are kind of how I texture the platforms.
Okay.
So here we have a basic texture sheet of on the left of the what we call the diffuse map, which is just the color values of the texture. So as you can see on the very, very far left, where we have the brick, we have the bumpy edge of the platform. Then we have the sort of blind strips on the right as well. I will put these all in strips that I can then grab the face of the geometry. So you have the top. I can then arrange that whole top rectangle over the area I want. So I just want the brick and the bumpy platform edge on the left. And then that should give me a nice section of that texture that I can then just see in my modeling software. On the very far right-hand side, I've split it up into a few different chunks. So the very top left corner is the map you see on the left. That is just our color value. What we are looking at the moment, it's a little bit tricky with commercial constraints, but it's something that myself and one of the other artists on the team wants to try and integrate into our workflow, is using normal maps. So normal maps give you a nice, as you see in sort of Train Sim World 2, you see some sort of nice surface detail where you go up to something that looks kind of like stone because it's got nice bumps and whatnot.
Yeah.
That's something we want to start adding into TS1. So the textures have a bit more depth and a bit more realism to them. And then you see in the very bottom right-hand corner, something that we've started doing is winter platform textures. So originally we didn't want snow on the platforms, so instead we've started adjusting the texture a little bit, so it has a little bit of a frosty feel to it.
Right, I see. So just to, again, is that, I imagine, to add that realism again, just to make it a bit more, well, real? Yeah,
that's to add a bit more realism, so when people go into, say, for example, their winter setting, it feels cold and they're not looking at texture that feels quite warm. We want it to feel nice and cold if it's going to be winter.
I like that. Excellent.
I've seen just one question.
Go for it.
A couple of questions. Where do we get our textures from? I primarily use textures.com. That's primarily what I use. And how many layers do I use? It really depends on what I am making. Music melody. If I'm making something like this, I will probably split into 5 or 6. So the far left rumble strip that sits on the platform edge, that would be a layer. The brick would be a layer. The strip next to it would be a layer, and so on and so forth. So making sure that those slithers of texture are really nice and easy to move about, and I can take them, copy them, and use them again elsewhere.
Excellent.
Excuse me.
That's quite all right. On to the next slide.
On to the next slide.
This is going to be a running joke at some point, isn't it? Like, I feel like everyone's going to make fun of me for asking about the next slide.
On to the next slide.
Yeah.
So here you can see the platforms kind of in their finished state, just as platforms. So this is what they will look like in my modeling software, 3ds Max, before I take them in game. I've not got the geometry turned on, so you can't see them sort of split into chunks, but they're split into sort of about meter and a half chunks. And this station was particularly interesting because it had multiple different kinds of platforms, which is why making the chunks made it quite easy, because I could determine where I wanted the platforms to end and split and change textures, and where I wanted ones to be sort of continuous. It was much easier to manipulate things. But this was just to give you a sort of idea of what they look like finished in my modeling software.
Yeah.
But we can move on to the next slide now. That one was nice quick one.
That one was a quick one. Ooh. Well, it's pink for a start, so that's
it. It is pink. So this is what the buildings look like before I've touched them. This is the building that we get from the grey box. Or that I've made from the grey box. So these buildings will have the rough dimensions of the size of the building, which I will get off Google Earth and reference images. I tend to use some standardized sizings. So, for example, the height of a story, we tend to use about 3 meters. So if it's a 2-story building, it'll end up being 6 meters tall before the roof. And then I tend to just sort of drag a nice edge up the middle to get a nice roof. These are basically just blocks of geometry kind of pushed together. They're not joined together or anything.
Okay, yeah.
So there's kind of nothing special about them. They're very rudimentary shapes.
Musical Melody asked another question, actually. This is with regards to stations more than buildings, but they asked, what's the ideal resolution you use on big parts of a station?
So if, due to the sort of limitations of the software, we don't want to go too high resolution. So when it comes to texturing buildings, if it's, or even with the stations, if it's something that has a very similar texture all around, so say for example, I've got my hard drive case here, that is just a nice sort of black fabric looking piece of material. So I will just use what we call as a tiling texture, and that is a texture that you could make it as large as you want, as small as you want. It will constantly duplicate itself perfectly. So it'll look seamless. There won't be any nice big dirty seams, or there shouldn't be anyway. Whereas the tiling textures tend to be 512 by 512. But the detail ones, so if we have specific details such as logos or signs or windows or door textures, we'll put them all into one texture, and that texture tends to be about 1024 by 1024. Or, I mean, if there's loads on there and we're really, really pushing detail, we'll go to 2048 by 2048. But if you're making textures, make sure they are in, I believe it's increments of 8, so 8 by 8, 16 by 16, 128, 256, 512, 1024, 2048, 4096. Depends how kind of detailed you want to go. But I primarily use 1024 and 512. Those are the sort of resolution sizes I use.
Nice. On to the next slide.
On to the next one.
Ooh.
So
detailed.
Here we have the building actually modelled now.
Yeah.
So you can see it's split up into a few different chunks or a few different colours.
Yep.
So the sort of light turquoisey blue we have down the bottom. Each of those sections will be built as one will be built. So say for example, one of them, I think they're windows. One of them might be a door. But I will build one of those little chunks and texture that up. I will then duplicate that as many times as I need it. So I'm not then building a whole side of a wall bespoke. I'm only building one chunk and then duplicating it loads of times, and it's already made and already textured. This only works with certain buildings, obviously, because some aren't just a nice duplication of the same window over and over again. Some, like the UK routes, tend to be a little bit more bespoke and a bit more complicated. But the Germans are good with their architecture, so they make it nice and easy for me to build things.
How thoughtful of them.
Yeah, aren't they just? The other ones, I build very much the same. I build in a sort of nice square, make some detail inside, and texture them up. And so I will then build the model and make sure that it is the right sort of amount of faces. We've not got too many. The geometry looks correctly. And so things are going to move nice and smoothly throughout the next phase, which should be texturing, which, as we move on to the next slide, you should see some textures appearing. So, as I mentioned before, on the left we have one of the tiling textures. From left to right, it tiles nice and fine. However, you can probably see creeping at the bottom there is a little bit of dirt creeps up. So that I tend to use as running along the base of a wall. It just gives a nice little bit of detail so that things look nice and grounded in the world. A little bit of dirt pushes your models a long way. Sorry, I've just seen someone in chat say about the texture sizes. Yes, so they don't need to be perfectly square. You can make your textures, as long as they are increments of 8, or multiples of 8, that's what I should say, then that's fine. So you can make one, as Atomic Danny is saying, 2048 by 256 if you want. As long as they are those multiples of 8, you'll be fine.
There you go. Excellent.
So yeah, the one on the left, we have a nice, easy 5 by 512 by 512 tiling texture, and the one on the right is exactly the same. That's 512 by 512. However, the one on the right is a little bit more unique, as it is a roof texture, if you hadn't already guessed. So with roof textures and things that face the sky, we will make a winter texture for them. Essentially what that is just taking the texture, dragging a nice white layer on Photoshop over it, or grabbing a snow texture and dragging that off and dialing the opacity right down, and making it look like it is kind of covered in snow during the winter. That's primarily the sort of tiling textures. They're fairly simple.
Pretty straightforward.
They're pretty straightforward. It's just making sure your tiling texture actually tiles correctly.
Yeah.
That's one thing that even I struggle with, making sure things tiled correctly. We should be able to move on to the next slide, which goes into a bit more depth about the more bespoke textures we make.
Yeah, there's quite a lot going on in this particular slide.
Yeah, so this one is a lot more populated.
Yeah.
So you saw previously the tiling textures, they're nice and simple, fairly basic. These textures, bespoke textures that we will build, aren't so quick to make. So these will be for small details around the station, such as doors, windows, signs, kind of bespoke elements. So especially on Riser Bahnhof, around about the corners of the buildings, they have really nice big stones that I wanted to especially capture because it really grounds the building and adds just a little bit, enough detail that's really noticeable enough that will really make that building stand out. We also do a very similar thing for signs, so we will arrange all of our signs, or kind of as much as we can at the time, onto one texture sheet. These textures tend to be, as I said before, 1024 all the way up to 2048. 2048 is the kind of the absolute max. We don't go any larger than that. And this will mean that when we're calling out the textures for a station in game, we're only calling out one texture rather than a whole load of other textures. This reduces performance issues and really drives a nice sort of smooth experience for the player, or should do. Should help towards it at least. There are lots of moving parts that happen. So these kind of, like I said, they're the bespoke bits. They're the nice little details, and they're what really sort of sets the station apart from other stations. But we should be able to move on.
Let's go on to the next one.
On to the next one. So the next one is...
I don't have a clue what I'm looking at. What is this?
So this looks bananas.
Right, yeah.
Even to me, this looks bananas. So what you're looking at now is my light baking scene.
Right.
So once I've taken a model from placeholder through modeling, through texturing, I will then bring the model straight into another scene I have set up, which will bake my ambient occlusion. So ambient occlusion, for those of you who don't know, is the little subtle shadows around something. So say you have the corner of a wall, that corner will be ever so slightly shadowed down the crease. and or say you have say your monitor that you're looking at now is sat in front of a wall. Behind that monitor is a nice sort of soft shadow behind it. That actually capturing that real time is incredibly expensive performance-wise. So we need to capture that inside our textures. And the way we do that is by light baking. So I will take the model into my light baking scene, which has a nice big plate set up at the bottom. That plate will basically give me light bounce off the light source, which is the nice little yellow hemisphere that you see just above everything. That will give the bounce light off the bottom, and we should get a sort of nice light bake.
So you're kind of replicating the sun there.
Yeah, essentially, that's basically what we're trying to do. So things like canopies should cast really nice shadows onto the platform texture or onto the platform itself, that we can then drag the shadow map out and apply that to the model. And I've set up on the next slide kind of what the light baking process looks like once we get it going.
Mm-hmm. No, I like it. On to the next.
Yeah.
On to next.
Which should, as I said, be the sort of light baking in process. So it kind of looks like nothing at the moment. I've captured it kind of halfway through. This is what the actual light baking process looks like. So a lot of this period is just waiting around. So I will set up things on the right. I've actually set it up incorrectly, I can see. So I'll have to make sure that my channel is set correctly. That channel should be 2. So the way that a model in TrainSim, or in the shader that we use primarily for TrainSim functions, is you have 2 slots. Your first slot is for all your color maps, and your second slot is for your shadow maps. What we want to start using is the normal maps as well, which would replace the second slot, and the shadow maps would go in the third slot. But for the time being, we'll go through the 1-2 workflow. So our second channel is our shadow maps. I will then add, as you can see, sort of halfway down, we have a nice little table where it says element name complete map, and underneath it says add. So I will then add a slot for the shadow map. That will then allow the software to sort of kind of figure out what it's trying to do.
Right.
I will then choose the target map slot type, which we want to be ambient color. When you are doing this, make sure you have a uniform white texture all over your model. That will give you a nice even light bake, and will give you a black and white light bake, which is ideally what you need. I will then set the size. So as you can see, I've got it set as 1024, and then after all that's done, I can then hit render, and then my PC will then start to take off as it tries to render all these giant file maps.
So that actually leads into one of the questions from Chief Jack, and he says, how many bakes and samples for baking do you do? It sounds like you're baking bread, but yes. How many do you do?
By that, do you mean how many do we do per station?
Let's go for per station.
Per station. Again, as I said, I said this earlier, and I feel like it's kind of the cop-out answer is it really depends.
Okay.
So for this station being much larger, I was probably looking at 4-ish.
Okay. 4
shadow maps, I believe. One for buildings, one for platforms. Maybe I did it in 3, and then one for clutter. I might have split clutter into 2 because there was quite a lot on this station. So I tend to bake at the end of my process, and I will then take that into game, make sure the bake has come through properly, If the bake hasn't come through properly, I will then come back and have to do another one.
Yeah.
But a lot of the time it tends to be that because the way I split my models up, they will. So in my previous scene, my previous bit of software, I will arrange a few elements. So, say for example, lampposts, signs, and canopies. I will arrange them on one shadow map, and they will all get unwrapped into one shadow map. However, when we are when I'm baking, they will bake separately because they are identified as separate elements in the modeling software. I will then have to take those separate shadow map sheets into Photoshop and compile them together using, I believe it's a Lighten layer. Yeah, I believe it's a Lighten layer, and that will allow, because we've used black and white, that will allow all the white texture from below to shine through all the other black area that's sitting above it, and should in the end give us a nice shadow map. Should is being the key word.
There have been many puns about baking in the chat.
The baking.
So on to the next slide,
which should be the finished bake.
That just looks like a mess. How on earth do you understand what is going on there?
It does look like a mess. A lot of the time I don't. I let the software understand what is going on.
Fair enough, because
but I can kind of see what is going on. So on the left we have the platform shadow map, and this is quite a good shadow map. So you have the geometry split uniformly across the map. Those sort of grey areas you can see, say on the bottom left hand squares, you can see some sort of darker grey areas over these white areas. That is where I'm not quite sure what it will be, but say for example a bin is sitting on top of the platform. That darker area will be cast because it's baked that shadow map information in. So when you then look in game around the base of rim of the bin, there should be a nice sort of dark shadow that makes it look really nice and grounded. In the world. However, if we look at the right-hand shadow map, this is not so great a shadow map. There's quite a lot of free space. Things have gotten very, very cluttered and condensed towards the top right-hand corner. So this is a shadow map that should ideally be split into maybe two different parts, so that you get a nice even bake. But these are kind of what the shadow maps look like, and it's all just the shadow information for the models. I think that's pretty much it for that slide.
Excellent. Yeah, someone said in the chat it looks like an artwork from Picasso. I agree, it does. You've created a piece of art.
Oh, thank you. You're too kind. Too kind.
Oh, wow. So now we're on to like a very detailed version.
Yeah, so this is all this work that we have done so far. So we've modelled, we've textured, we've built our shadow maps. This is what the final product kind of ends up looking like in the modelling software. We use, or what I use at the moment, is the train light map with diffuse shader in 3ds Max. That will, as I said, that will give me the diffuse and that will give me the shadow map in two separate channels. As I saw someone saying in chat or asking, AO Bake is the second channel and the color bake or the colors are the first channel. So this I will have set up. I wish I'd actually taken a screenshot of my material editor. So I have a material editor, which is where I allocate all the different textures and attach shadow maps to all those different textures.
Okay, yeah.
So this building, probably from what I can see, is made up of roughly about 5 textures or so. So we have a sort of tiling texture with the creamy plaster and the slightly less creamy plaster. The roof is a nice tiling texture. The edging on the roofs is, by the looks of it, a tiling texture. And then the windows and those brick edgings that you can see, they are the bespoke map that we've built into it. This last bit is, or the sort of texturing and bringing it all together, always is the longest point. That last 10%, if you're making artwork, is always the bit that takes the longest, which is something that I've come to learn to love and hate over my period of being an artist.
I'm seeing the chat ask about lights. What do you want to know about lights? Because that's a bit vague. Something about lights.
I can maybe sort of address this because it's depending on what they're asking. But with lights, so I don't have any lights in my 3ds Max scene. I just use I believe it's the shadows view or the non-shadows view or something like that. You can have a realistic view which looks for a light source to cast realistic shadows and real-time shadows, whereas I just turn that off and don't bother with that.
Right.
All the lights are handled in-game. So whether that be the sunlight or lights that have been placed by the route builders along canopies, the only thing we really do for lights, for example, for a canopy light, I will take the section that is meant to be lit, I will apply a texture, say it's just a basic bulb texture, and then when it hits night, that texture will then change to an emissive glow texture, which I believe is the shader name. As long as you have _night as your suffix, that should then change when the in-game time hits night. I believe it's about 8 o'clock. But there are a few suffixes that we use, so _night, _WI, _AU, and _SP. Winter, WI is winter, AU is autumn, and SP is spring, I believe.
Sweet. On to the next.
Yeah. I think those are the only suffixes I can think of. So once we've built all the buildings for the station, I will then move on.
I was going to say it took me a minute to figure out what I was looking at there. I've just seen the seats and the... Yeah.
Should become a bit more obvious in the next slide when we get there. I will then move on to building the clutter assets and populating the platforms with all the different bits of clutter. So I've just seen someone say specular workflow. Yeah, so TS1, we use sorry, I didn't say this earlier. We use a specular workflow. And by that, I mean we don't have any of the sort of fancy PBR things. So we don't have roughness, which determines how rough a surface is by adjusting the shininess and the mattness that it appears. We don't have metalness, so how metal something looks. We only have access to color maps, normal maps, specular maps, which we use on the windows a lot of the time. So it makes them at least give a shine. Or shadow maps at the end. So we are very limited with the sort of maps that we have. But yeah, once we have built the buildings, I'll then move on to the clutter assets. These tend to be, with German routes especially, very easy to make modular. Due to, I think, German infrastructure updates quite regularly around their stations. So they are constantly putting in new bits and bobs, which tend to be the same along a full route. So I only have to make a few benches, for example, maybe a couple of bins, a couple of different Lego sets of canopies, maybe like an elevator, and then some signs. And I can have all those assets and drop them in like Lego bits when I need them. So this is kind of what it looks like in the grey box without any textures applied. And if you move on to the next slide,
is this still the same station we saw at the beginning?
This is indeed. So this is quite a large station. I
to the next one.
Believe the building is actually behind where I'm looking right now.
It actually has the name of the station right there now on the next slide.
There
As I ask, there's the name. I should have
go.
just clicked to the next slide, shouldn't I?
So this is what it'll look like in the modeling software. Things like glass, we use a trained glass shader, and that will give us a nice see-through surface. So where you can see these dividers, they have a nice blue sort of block in between them. That's how it views in Max, but actually in game it should view totally or not totally transparent, but transparent enough that it looks like glass. But yeah, this is what the assets kind of look like.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? Like the difference between literally the previous slide and this one, and I'm just, my head is having a hard time processing it from the very beginning to where we're at now. Like, it's amazing.
So it's once you break it down, it is way easier to process. So it looks very overwhelming here, but I do not build it like this. I build it in sort of chunks. So I will build. You can see the elevator on the right. I'll build that as one thing. I think that elevator is actually from Train Sim World. A little bit of collabing there.
Yeah.
I will build the sort of signs, and I will build different elements that I will then just arrange. So I'm not trying to build it all as one thing and building different bespoke bits for each different bit, even though they're exactly the same. So breaking it down and breaking it into chunks makes it way easier.
Yeah.
Way easier. And you should see kind of how it looks in the modeling software on the next slide all together.
Ooh.
So this is, there are some nicer in-game shots at the end, but this is kind of the only shot I could get that really captured everything. So before it goes into game, I have to prep it, so I have to make sure all the clutter's in. So lampposts with their emissive textures as a separate object.
Yeah.
Some signs, cameras, and then the buildings, make sure everything is kind of arranged how it should be. We tend to use reference to try and get this as accurate as possible, but where reference is not really available, we just sort of take some sort of artistic licenses with that. So we'll kind of make it look how we think it should look, and what would look good.
Yes. Yeah.
Rather than just sort of speculating, is what do we think looks good and what do we think the community might like the look of.
Yeah.
So especially with the little details that a few of us have been, or myself have been trying to add things like cameras, just to really give the station a bit more feel, or speaker systems and whatnot. Really just like give the stations a bit more realism, because Train Sim World's getting all the love, so we're going to make sure Train Simulator gets some love as well.
Yeah, definitely.
This station is Riser Bahnhof, Fraser.
Yeah.
And as we move on,
this
is kind of what the export menu looks like. I've moved it off to the side so you can see the station as well. I've made sure to include the file type so that people can see that. So when exporting into game, I select everything that I want to be in game. One thing that I should have stated is when you're making a model for in-game use, you have to make sure that it starts off one underscore and then 4 digits. So the 1 is for your level of detail. So that can range from 1 to 3 or 4, I believe it is, in Train Simulator. As you move further away, that will then change level of detail. So say, for example, you're up close, you want all the detail you can get so the player can see it. As the player moves away, they're about maybe 200 meters away, 100 meters away, you want that to change to a slightly lower resolution model, because they're a far enough distance away that they won't notice that difference. And then as you move much further away, those things will either drop to a really, really tiny resolution, a really tiny sort of density of faces and geometry, to the point where then after that they will then just sort of pop out of existence. But the player is so far away that they'll never see that.
Okay.
So the numbers after the one, the level of detail, those four numbers are your distance. So with things like a big building that you see in the background, I will have them on about 700 to 800 meters, so that the player can see them as they're coming towards the station. With things like lampposts and signs, they tend to be on about 300, 200 meters, so that they will pop into existence before the player gets close enough to notice they're popping into existence.
That makes sense.
And then once you're exporting, select everything that you want, and then make sure you're exporting as an IGS file, which you can then take into the blueprint editor, set up a .xml file, I believe it is, and then you should just be able to open that. And those XML files will be the ones that will export into game, which we can see some nice in-game shots just after this slide.
We're getting much smoother with this slide transition, by the way.
We just needed to warm up,
We did. Instead of like next slide, it's just sort of like, and next one.
So this is what things look like in game once we've taken it in. So we have our diffuse texture, we have all the colors, we have our shadow map, we have maybe a couple of normal maps on there as well. And this is kind of as we take it into game. There's not these sort of next few shots are just kind of showing off what the station looks like. So if anyone has any sort of big questions or something they'd like to ask, then I'm more than happy to try and answer things.
Yeah, so Joe has a question. Objects can LOD out not only based on distance but also viewing angle. Why is that?
That I'm afraid I do not know. That is down to the dark arts of Train Simulator.
Okay.
You're
not all knowing?
I'm not all knowing as much as people might like to think.
Consider me disappointed.
Sorry, that I do not know.
I'm
not sure about.
But yeah, no, seriously, in the chat, if you've got questions, now is your chance to ask them. I know that some people have been asking as we've been going along, but Andy will do his best to answer questions if he knows the answer. And I guess that's fair. We can't expect you to answer questions you don't know the answer to.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I can speculate, but then I think I'll be doing people a disservice who might actually know.
Well, exactly. On to the next one.
Yeah, we can have a look at the next one. So that first one was the signal box at Riser, and the next one should be the main building. So this is the main building in-game, complete from what we saw. You can see there's some nice sort of shadows underneath the canopies that will have come through with our shadow map. One thing that I can see in this screenshot that I will raise is that when we bring these stations into game, we have to make sure that we're allocating a little bit of extra time for the route builders to adjust geometry. So as you can see at the front here, we have the sort of pavement sits much higher than the in-game pavement. So the route builders will then go in, raise the terrain up to match the stations.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes things like that get missed, but accidents always happen.
Yeah, well, that's what happens when you employ human beings and not robots.
Exactly. We're only human.
Exactly. So some questions from the chat. What has been your hardest station to create?
Oh, that is a hard question.
If not hard, maybe perhaps challenging.
I would say probably the one that I considered my magnum opus at the time was Watford Junction off West Coast Main Line. That was quite a tricky station to build because that was about 12 platforms or something, with curves and annoying gradients, and the monolithic structure that is Watford Junction was a little bit of a pain to get looking right and to get it situated in the game world at the right levels. That was a little bit of a pain. I would say that's probably been the most difficult.
Yeah.
I reckon. Yeah.
And then another question from Chief Jack is, you mentioned at the beginning that you've worked on 5 DLCs. What are the 5?
So I recently did an art dump actually, so I know them. So I worked when I joined in Train Simulator team. I started working on the Lubeck Kiel route. Then just after that, we moved on to Fife Circle, the Scottish route, which is where I'm originally from myself. So I took great national pride in making that one. Then we moved on to West Coast Main Line. After that, we moved on to Dresden, I believe, and then we moved on to Cross City after that.
Okay, yeah.
So those are the 5 that I've been working on.
That's awesome. I saw a question and it's just disappeared.
Typical, good old technology.
I know, it just scrolled up and now I can't. I'll have to look for it again in a moment. But yeah, it's quite a lot of work that goes into it then, isn't it? It's not as straightforward as you think. Sometimes I think it's easy to take it for granted when you're playing it because you think, oh, this must have been easy, and it's not.
It's not when it comes to because I've recently sort of stepped into a position where I'm now kind of managing projects and I'm managing outsourcers as well. It's not as easy as just going in and modeling something. That bit is easy enough because I know my workflow really well now. So doing that is easy. It's getting everything. It's arranging everything and then also making things within a time constraint. Making it in the time constraint is probably the most tricky bit because you have to be very particular with what details you're going to leave in that you think the community will really enjoy and what details you're going to have to take out, which when you're looking at real life reference is quite hard to sort of, as an artist, think, oh, I'm going to have to leave that out. I can't include that.
Yeah. I mean,
so
I imagine you wish you could make it as realistic and
accurate
as you possibly could with every single detail imaginable.
Oh,
but
I would love that.
Currently, we're not quite there.
Yeah, we're not quite there. If I had all the time in the world, I could make something incredible, but I am very limited by commercial constraints, sadly. But we're a business. We're going to make money, right?
On to the next slide. Is there a next slide?
There should be a couple more slides. Should be a few more slides. Nice little shot from the front of the big station. As we're sort of coming through here, if I could give a little shout out to the TS team.
Yeah, do it. Give them a shout out.
The Train Sim team. I've seen him in chat. Atomic Danny Leach, one of our main route builders. Fantastic route builder. Just recently received his 10-year badge today.
That's amazing.
He's been at the company for 10 years. MRFS is our main signal guy. Fantastic, eccentric human being who makes some wonderful signals. Josh, who has recently joined us as our coder, who's coming along leaps and bounds and a fantastic human being to work with. Joe Burgess has recently moved off over into the TSW team. For all you that loves scenarios, he will be making some of your scenarios from now on. But he was one of our fantastic scenario makers on the TS team. And Mark Rothkegel, who is the vehicle artist who makes all the wonderful trains that you see. All of them are wonderful human beings and incredible people to work with.
So you have quite a close relationship with your team.
The train simulator the train simulator team is really quite small. We're a very, very small, tight knit group, so we are very, very close with each other.
That's lovely.
And we don't love working crunch time, but when the crunch time comes, we all pull together and sort of get the pieces out in the evening and work together. So they're a fantastic team. And
then on to the next one.
On to the next one. A nice little shot from the end of the platforms or the end of the canopies, looking over the building. So these are just sort of shots that I used in my portfolio. Trying to make them sort of as realistic as possible. One thing that I was taught by Derek Siddle, the art director, is that if you're going to take shots of your stations, make sure you take them at realistic heights, because taking them in helicopter cam makes it not look sort of as realistic
Okay,
Uh,
yeah.
so if you want to get realistic looking shots, imagine kind of how a real human would take them.
That makes
Um,
sense because like this particular shot, it makes you feel like you're the one stood there, doesn't it?
yeah, yeah, exactly. That's kind of what you want to feel. You want to feel like you're able to stand there and kind of be in that world.
Yeah.
So what my job is making worlds that people can feel like they live in.
Yeah. I like it.
And there should be one final image for you all.
One final image.
One final image of, I believe this was just like a sort of service building that was on
Hmm.
the edge. Um,
Excellent.
see if I can grab a quick question.
Yeah, go for it. If you've seen any
Uh,
questions you like, answer them.
do you do so? I see Hentis Rail. It said, do you do the routing of the passengers in your station models? No. So the passenger sort of walking areas are determined by a loft in the engine. Um, I have to be quite careful when I'm making stations. So if I'm making canopies, for example, we had it, especially with this station, where the canopy runs all the way along the platform, making sure that those canopy poles don't get in the way of the passenger lofts, because otherwise then you get passengers walking straight through canopy poles,
hmm
which really breaks the immersion. So
Yeah.
that's not something I include in the model. Ah, Joe Bird just coming in and answering it for me.
No, there you go. Excellent. And I
Yeah,
guess we're done. That's it.
yeah, I think we're primarily done. End.
Well, thank you so much, Andy, for giving us such a detailed explanation about the processes you take to creating stations.
You're very well.
It's been really insightful. I feel like I've learned an awful lot because before tonight, didn't really know anything. So
Makes it a
it's
little
definitely
clearer.
helped me. Don't know how much I've actually managed to process. I might have to have a look at the presentation again. But yeah, definitely been interesting for me, and I hope that everybody in the chat has enjoyed it as much as I have. So we're going to say goodnight, but just want to say thank you again, Andy, and thank you to everybody in the chat, and I hope you have a good night.
Thank you very much for putting up with me.
That's quite all right. Good night from me.
Good night from me.
Bye, everyone.